Okay. So this is actually the point I meant to bring up earlier when I brought up Teal, but I got off on a tangent on, which is I think the point that everyone missed that he brought up is that his thesis is that economic growth is necessary because of mimetic theory. Because his idea is that economic growth is what keeps the violence at bay. If you have economic growth, you're not going to go to war and have uncontained violence.
Okay.
So basically, he says that the way to prevent large scale, macro scale global violence is to sustain economic growth, which I'm still trying to figure out if that's true or not, but I think it's an interesting proposal of his. So in a way, he almost doesn't want to contain the envy, but he wants to sublimate it. He wants to redirect it away from violence and more into consumption.
I think the miracle of the fishes and loaves illustrates that point. You know what I mean? Where you have the story of the kid who brings just a basket full of fish and loaves.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jesus takes it voluntarily. The child gives it, and he feeds the 5,000 with it. So he breaks scarcity, right? And he doesn't cut up the bread and fish into little tiny particles, so everybody gets a little bit. He breaks the concept of scarcity, so that just a little offering is the exchange, a little offering of love, of self-sacrifice. The child gives up their meal
Mm-hmm.
that was going to feed their family, and now that exchange, that voluntary exchange between the child and the teacher, provides food for everybody that breaks the foundations of scarcity, holding back, which is where envy comes from. Because if you cut up that fish, somebody's going to get left out.
Mm.
Theoretically, you could cut up the fish and loaves so that everybody gets a particle in a field of 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going to be satisfied, and it may look like somebody got a little bit more than another.
Yeah.
And the moment somebody gets one atom of fish and loaf more than the other, you have envy and rivalry developing.
Yep.
And so Jesus breaks that whole matrix that we're all stuck on. And he says, no, I'm just going to keep pulling out and more fish and more loaves. And you're like, okay, is that just a magic trick? No, that's an attack on the concept of scarcity itself.
Yes.
It's a declaration of war against scarcity.
Yeah.
Such that when Jesus says later on, you will do greater things than I, that calls to mind those stories as prefigurements of what we are to do as his body on earth, right?
Yeah.
That we are to break that foundational matrix of scarcity through voluntary self-sacrifice. You create an abundance for people that alleviates the tension amongst the crowd, right?
Yeah. So I think that's also what Thiel meant when he said the problem with communism isn't redistribution but violence. Because if you just divide up the fish into like tiny pieces, you're doing a form of redistribution, but people are still going to fight over food and there's still going to be violence. But if you multiply that food and give it to everyone else, you're still redistributing it, but you just have more of everything.